this morning is from Genesis 40, verses 1 through 15. It's in your program there if you want to follow along. Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison, for I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon."
Great story that was just read for us, and we've been going through the book of Genesis and studying the life of Joseph. And just so you know, if we look ahead a little bit in this story, the cupbearer, Joseph tells him, "Hey, don't forget about me." Well, the cupbearer forgot. And Joseph is still in prison, like for 2 more years. He sits in prison. Didn't get to enjoy this kind of an environment for a while, sitting in prison. But he did okay with it because he knew that God was with him. And that's what we've been hearing over and over in our study of the book of Genesis, and now in the life of Joseph. We're looking at his life and being encouraged by that. He knew, and it's been said over and over again, the Lord was with him. Wherever he was, God was always with him. And he knew that. And so God's powerful presence with him was the power that he needed to persevere. God was with him. And so he knew that, and so he could persevere in the strength and the power of God. So, looking ahead, you have these 2 dreams. The cupbearer and the baker were in jail, and they had these 2 dreams, and Joseph interpreted them. And the cupbearer's dream came true, which was great. Lots of dreaming going on, if you've noticed in these stories. His dream came true. The baker's came true also, but it wasn't so great. He loses his life. The cupbearer gets out, forgets about Joseph. Then Pharaoh has these 2 dreams. And we'll read about them in a little bit, but he has these 2 dreams, and he couldn't get anybody to interpret the dreams. He couldn't find anybody that could tell him what they meant, and they were really troubling him. And it was at that point that the cupbearer was like, "Oh, I know a guy, Joseph." And so Pharaoh calls Joseph to come, and he asked him, "Can you interpret these dreams for me?" And here's what Joseph says, and this is kind of our key thought for today. I hope that if you don't remember anything else I say in these moments, you remember this. It's really out of Genesis 41, verse 16. Looking ahead, if you have your Bible, you also have it written in your handout. And in your handout, there's an outline if you're a visual person and like to follow along in that way too. Genesis 41:16 is where something really significant is expressed, and we've been hearing this over and over again in the life of Joseph. He was always in these situations where he was powerless. Over and over again, we find him in these situations where he was powerless, but he knew that God was with him. So listen to what he says in chapter 41, verse 16. He says, "I cannot do it." Pharaoh's asking, "Can you interpret these dreams?" He says, "I cannot do it." But God can give you the answer that you desire. God can do it. That's our key thought that I just want to unpack for a few minutes. And I hope it resonates with you. What Joseph said here is significant for us in our daily life. I cannot do it, but God can. He lived his life that way, and that's an expression that comes out in this story. I cannot do it, but God can. And that posture of his heart opened up all kinds of doors for him. because he knew he couldn't do it, then God could. God could say, I can. And God could, and he did. He spoke into the life of Joseph, and he spoke through Joseph to interpret those dreams. And he did great things in and through Joseph, and he'll do the same for us. When we come to that place, I can't, but God can, it opens the door for God to do incredible things. Things beyond our imagination. Even things that we would never dream of. So let me ask this question. What about your life today? What about your life do you really need God to show up? What about your life do you need God's creative power? You know, we're sitting in this place where he created all these trees and all this magnificence in Trinity County that we get to behold all the time. He's big enough. Where do you need his strength to show up? Where do you need his power and his strength beyond your own? Because we do. You know, Jesus kind of gave us a bottom line when he said in John 15, he said, apart from me, you can do nothing. So, really, I can't. But he can. And he does, and he will, and he is. I cannot do it, but he can. So as we study the life of Joseph, if you've been tracking with us, we've been studying the life of Joseph, and he's a great hero of the faith, and he was called the dreamer, and he had these dreams, and he shows us, you know, he kind of liberates our hearts, I would hope, that we can dream, and dream big dreams. And as we study his life, it's not a story about the success and the victory of Joseph. It's really a story about God's faithfulness to show up and to empower him to do things greater than he could ever imagine. And for us, he will empower us to do great things. If the posture of our heart is that, I can't, but God can. We titled this current series with Joseph, Daring to Dream. And I hope that you're dreaming. I hope that, you know, sometimes we have dreams that are spiritual dreams that God gives us to kind of set our course and to give us some insights and give us some motivations. But deep down inside, I hope that you're dreaming and that your dreams haven't been robbed away, but that you're daring to dream. Again, that's kind of our topic these days. It's based on the life of Joseph, who was the dreamer. And if we dream big dreams, if we want to dream God-sized dreams for us, we have to know that God-sized dreams require God-sized power. Amen. I will not learn and step into and live out God's dreams for me unless I know that they're his dreams, and not just the pizza I ate. I know they're his dreams for me, and he will empower them to happen. Only he could empower them to happen. That's a good place to be. God, if anything's going to happen with this, you're going to have to do it. I think he delights when we come to that place of humility and realize that I want to dream his dreams. So, God, give me big dreams and help me. And we've talked about how one of God's big dreams for each of us, no matter what your specific dream would be and however that would be articulated and however you would share that, whatever your particular individual dream is, and I think God gives those to us. Dream a big dream, whatever that is for you. In the process, God's bigger dream for every one of us is to make us more and more like Jesus, to shape us and fashion us to be more like him so that we can draw others to him. And the only one that can accomplish that, the only one that can help me to become more like Jesus is Jesus. I cannot become more like Jesus in my own strength, but God can. I cannot, but he can. And so when I lean into that, he empowers me to be more and more like Jesus. So wherever I find myself at any given moment, including in pain and suffering, I know that God's still at work. He's still with me. He will empower this to do something in my life that will come to something even greater than I can imagine down the road. So a couple of things this morning, a couple of truths that I'd like to just share that we can draw from the life of Joseph. When we live by faith beyond our own power, I cannot but God can. When we live beyond our own power and live by faith, God will empower some things that I think we see in the life of Joseph. Here's one. When we live by faith beyond our own power, God will empower a sense of scale. bigger than me, and that builds this thing called humility. Humility is built into our life. Joseph had this sense of scale. We see this in verse 8 that was read for us. He said to the cupbearer and the baker, he said, I cannot interpret dreams. Interpreting dreams is God's business. I can't help you, but God can. That is humility. I can't, but God can. You know, being out in creation like this, it just creates a sense of scale and proper proportion, doesn't it? Being out here in our interior worlds, in our homes, in our businesses, in our inside buildings, we can all kind of become like the giants, right? We can, control our environment. We can be the king of the place that we live. We can, the shortest one among us can figure out a way to reach up and touch the ceiling. Look, Dad, I can touch the ceiling. But when we're out in creation, it kind of resets our sense of scale and proportion sometimes, doesn't it? I mean, when we're outside, we can't control the weather. We can't hit the thermostat and increase the temperature. We can't grab the remote and change what is happening around us that we see. Suddenly, when we're outside, we are not the dominating giants anymore. And so when we look at the magnificence of the mountains and behold a tree that's just so majestic and observe the expanse of the sky, doesn't it kind of give us a proper sense of scale and balance and proportion? Wow, this is an environment I cannot control, but God can. That's right. And He can meet me in it, wherever that is. We need that sense of scale and proportion to be able to say, God, I can't do it, but you can. I don't think it's hard to picture David lying out under the stars, looking up at the Milky Way, and writing these words, thinking these words perhaps, and then writing them later. Listen to these words in Psalm chapter 19, the first few verses. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of His hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voice goes out into all the earth. Their words to the ends of the world. Those are words that declare God's magnificent, creative, powerful glory. He created it all. And when we get out in creation like this and we're out in an outdoor setting, it gives us a proper sense of perspective that God is incredibly powerful and creative, and He cares about each one of us. When we get that perspective, it's humbling. It keeps us humble, keeps us in that proper place. I cannot do it. That's a statement of humility that really opens the door for God to say, I can. I cannot. He can. So Joseph models this for us. He pressed on through the elements, through the heat, through the storms, through the fires, through the struggles, through the dream killers, through the bad weather and horrible circumstances. And the whole time, God is shaping him in his character and developing humility in him. Growing his humility and developing his character so that later he can do these great things for God knowing that it's not him doing it. And God gets the glory. Learning humility. I don't know, is anybody in a season of humility development right now? I imagine some of you are. And if you are, or if you've been through it, or you know that you probably will go through it, learning humility is not easy. When Christy and I were working with pastoral candidates and missionary candidates out of Simpson University, one of the questions we would always try to ask is, how is God developing your character? Or I like the question, what is the hardest thing you've ever gone through and how did you get through it? That might be a good question to ask right now. It'd be very interesting if we could just pause in this moment and talk around tables and ask each other that question. What's the hardest thing you've ever gone through? And how did you get through it? And we would hope and pray that the testimony is only because God got me through it. And in the process, here's what he did in me. Here's the character that he built into my life. Here's the courage that he put in me. Here's the humility that he developed as I went through that season with him. Because learning to serve with humility only comes through tough things that causes us to be fully dependent upon Jesus. Fully surrendered to him, fully knowing that I cannot, but he can. The humility of that. And a special note in this, as we think about Joseph and his particular situation, not all suffering, not all pain. We can be of the mindset sometimes that we see somebody that's suffering or somebody that's in pain, and sometimes we don't even express it, but in our mind somewhere we have this thought, well, it's because they did this. They made these choices. They made their bed, they can sleep in it. That kind of thinking. Of course, in our circles, following Jesus, we wouldn't entertain that idea, but does it not sneak into your head sometimes? But here's the thing. Not all suffering, not all pain, not all things that we go through are our own fault. Joseph is in prison by no fault of his own. The cupbearer and the baker, they were in prison because they did something wrong. But Joseph is completely innocent, and he's in jail. Why? Because God put him in this place where he's shaping his character and growing his humility so that he can do greater things later. Living with faith beyond my power. It'll also empower something else, a sense of integrity that helps us be honest and real. One of the things I love about our Outpost Church family is one of our core values is to be real, be honest, be transparent. Don't hide your stuff. Let's be real and honest so that we can find healing and bring light into every situation, because that helps with integrity. I'm being honest about my life. This is me. I'm not hiding anything. Integrity. Sometimes it takes suffering to get us to that place. Notice something that would be easy to miss in the passage that we read for us in chapter 40, verse 14, toward the end of that passage. Joseph says something here that I think is showing us that Joseph's a real guy. Sometimes we can think of Joseph as like this superhero. Listen to how human he is in this expression in chapter 40, verse 14. He's telling the cupbearer, when you get out of here, don't forget about me. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me. You hear the me's? Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually said it like that. He was human. He was real. He was just being honest. I would like to get out of this prison, so don't forget about me. It's okay to be honest and transparent about our own journey, and it doesn't say that we're not growing in our faith. We can still be people of faith and grow even knowing that I'm honest about the me struggles. We can be honest about the me struggles without forgetting the powerful presence of God in the midst of it, because it's not a surprise for him anyway how we're feeling. Joseph wanted to get out of jail. The cupbearer forgot. In verse 23 of the chapter 40, that's what it says at the very end of the chapter. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Some of you in the room know what that looks like. Some of you sitting here know what that feels like to be forgotten, I think. Don't you? Some of you have been hurt. Some of you could give a testimony this morning that you know what it's like to care about somebody and then they don't care back. You know what it's like to invest in somebody and not forget them, but they forget you. Sometimes it's the people that are closest to us that make it hurt the worst. We get hurt. I mean, if we had some conversations, some real honest, transparent conversations around our fellowship of lunch today, and you're sharing with somebody, I think some of you could share some real stories. There are people sitting near you who are going through significant emotional pain right now, and maybe even feeling forgotten. But we don't want to forget. We want to remember and help each other. Joseph, think about him. It was his brothers that threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. It was Potiphar and wife, who he had gotten to know pretty well because he was serving in their house, that now Joseph's in prison. Joseph knew what it felt like to be forgotten and hurt by people that were close to him. But here's the thing. Joseph learned some character stuff and some humility stuff that we can learn too and help us to be stronger in our faith. Even in times when we feel misunderstood, forgotten, overwhelmed, captive to something. When we're in those places, I need power beyond my own strength, that when I open up the door by a humble expression, I cannot handle this emotionally. God can. He can meet us where we are. Think about that while you're sitting under a tree today. That's big enough to handle whatever it is you're going through. Here's one other thing that I think is empowered when we come to that place of, it's beyond my own power, a sense of perspective from the Father's heart. A sense of perspective from the Father's heart, which is really wisdom, seeing things the way God sees them. He can open the door so that we can see His perspective of things. And what that does is it generates empathy and compassion. You know, of all the people that had every right in the world to be angry and bitter, it was Joseph. He's in jail for not doing anything wrong. But he didn't let that hold him back. You know, his two cellmates, he noticed them, the cupbearer and the baker. He noticed them. He saw that they were sad and worried and distraught, and he stepped into that. Now, Joseph could have said, yeah, you guys think you have troubles? I was thrown into a pit by my brothers, and I was sold into slavery by my brothers, and I did something absolutely right, and I'm here in prison because of it. You think you have problems? But he didn't say any of that. He just asked the cupbearer and the baker questions and listened to them and listened to their struggles and allowed God to use him to help them. That's a whole new level of faith, isn't it? When we're in the middle of emotional struggles and problems of our own, to be able to look out and see someone else. And that's what God's perspective does. That's what wisdom does. It opens the door so that we can see somebody in need around us. You know, there's another way to put it. Particularly in our kind of setting where we're a community of faith and we want to grow in our relationship with Jesus and in our journey together with Jesus. One of the things that suffering does, that kind of suffering that develops character and humility in us, one of the things that does is it forces community. Sometimes it's in community where God wants us to be so that we can get the kind of God's help that we need. He puts us alongside other people that will help us. And when we care about each other and love each other and walk with each other and share concerns together, suffering creates a bond that's kind of special. When you're walking with somebody or suffering with somebody in a situation, it forms this bond that is like deeper. It grows our faith in the midst of the journey. People around us right now I said it once, that maybe I can accent this. I know there are people here that are really in a hard place right now and suffering and in pain and emotionally even distraught. This should be the safe kind of place. This should be the place where we can share with each other with open and honesty. This is me, this is what I'm going through. And we feel each other's pain and we help each other through the process. Reminding ourselves that God is with us in it. Sometimes, for me at least, when I'm in a bad place, sometimes the worst possible moments for me, if I'll let Him change my perspective and open my eyes, I'm there partially because this other person needs somebody with them. Friend, somebody to listen, to walk with them. You know, verse 8, Joseph has this gift and community and gifts of the Spirit. I think one of the things that suffering does is it It empowers the gifts of the Spirit. And it's like, we don't all, 1 Corinthians 12 talks about this, we don't all get all the gifts. God gifts each one according to his giving. And I think the reason for that is that we have different gifts, so it takes community for all the gifts to be expressed, especially when somebody is suffering and in a hard place and in need of help. Joseph had this gift of interpreting dreams. How did he use it? God empowered him to help someone else, to help others. He didn't use it on behalf of himself, but on behalf of others. So let me just prompt, even today, will we allow God to open our eyes to see the people around us? Sometimes I'm in a place of suffering, and, taking on somebody else's suffering feels like an extra burden sometimes, doesn't it? But in reality, that other person might be what I need even in my own suffering. Sometimes their help for me is more than I can even give them. And so when we posture ourselves, I can't help anybody else. I'm in a hard place myself. I don't even have the emotional reserve to help another person. I cannot. But God can. He can do it in me and through me to touch another soul, to touch another heart that is hurting. When Joseph took the time to share the interpretation of the dreams for the cupbearer and for the baker, what he was doing, especially for the cupbearer, he was planting seeds of his own freedom. He invested in these two guys, and it took a couple years, but it brought him to this incredible place. I want to wrap up this story this morning with some victory of this, something that I think is significant. If you have your Bible, look at chapter 41 and what unfolds in the rest of this story. Pharaoh has these dreams. Listen to these dreams that Pharaoh has. When 2 full years had passed, Joseph's in prison, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, and when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. And after them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. Sounds like a nightmare. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows, and then Pharaoh woke up. And so he's distraught about this and trying to find somebody to interpret the dreams for him. He finds Joseph. Joseph comes in, and he tells him, first of all, circling back to the verse we started with, first thing Joseph says is, Pharaoh wants him to interpret the dreams, and he says, I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. So Joseph tells him not just what the dream means, but what to do about it, which is really cool. That's only God that could give him that kind of wisdom and perspective and insight. So Pharaoh tells Joseph, or Joseph tells Pharaoh, well, here's what your dream means, and here's what you should do about it. And he says, you're going to have 7 years of great prosperity, and the crops are going to be rich. It's going to be wonderful. 7 good years are ahead of you. Then you're going to have 7 years of famine. So here's what you should do. During that 7 years, store stuff up so that when the famine hits, you will be able to get through those 7 years of famine because you're prepared for it. God gave him this dream to rescue a whole bunch of people in the midst of that. And so, if you page ahead to verses 37 to 41, listen to this. This is how Pharaoh then responds. Pharaoh says this, well, that plan seems good to him and to all his officials. So Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom the Spirit of God is, that would be able to, oversee this thing of 7 years of storing and 7 years of, they'll have what they need during the famine. Verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, he's talking to Joseph, there's no one as discerning and as wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace and of my people. They're all to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I give greater than you. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Wow! I mean, this is a moment in the story like, wait, what? This is Joseph, who was in a pit, who was sold into slavery, who did something right and got in jail for it. Now he's second in charge of all of Egypt. And not just Egypt. If you look at the very last verses in chapter 41, verse 57, it says, and all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe when it got to that point. I mean, can you put that whole story together? Joseph could never have dreamed that the dreams he had years ago in the middle of the night, those dreams he had and shared with his brother and got him to hate him and to be jealous of him and put him in a bad place, those dreams, he could never have envisioned they were going to turn out like this. I never thought that I would be second in command of all of Egypt. It was because God grew character in him. It was because through all the suffering and all the pain and all the turmoil, God was growing his humility so that he was in a powerful position of leadership and authority. He had the humility to continue to say what he's been saying all along. I cannot do it. God can. God can. He does. And he will. So can I just ask a couple questions to maybe prompt your thinking to make this applicable and real to you? What area of your life do you need God's creative power? Hopefully you've already been thinking about this since the beginning. Where do you need God to show up? Maybe you're in the place that you are right now because God is doing something in you to prepare you for something greater. Maybe you're in the place you are right now because there's another person that really needs you to invest in them. What is it that you need God's power for? Where do you need strength and power beyond your own? You know, those that are here that have committed their lives to Jesus and have come to that point of saying, Jesus, I need to surrender my life to you. You know, that's the initial prayer of salvation, isn't it? God, I need new management for this life. I'm going to continue to mess it up. I need new management. I can't do it anymore, but you can. And we come to that place of surrender, where we believe that Jesus died on a cross for me to set me free, that I can be forgiven and free to journey by faith and then to walk by faith, step by step, every single day, declaring, I cannot do it, but God can. And then God has bigger plans ahead. And we can dare to dream ourselves into those plans and know that if anything happens, it'll be for God's glory. So where do you need God to show up? And one other question that you might want to reflect on, and I hope you already are if you've been tracking with us in this study. What dreams do you believe God has for you? What dreams would you like to think more about? And if you have no idea what that is, maybe what's going on in your life right now, or what's stirring in your heart right now, or what your passions are right now, tap into that. Maybe will give an indicator into what God's bigger dreams are that you've never even thought about dreaming. What's he stirring in you now? What dreams is he putting in you now that might make a difference in your life and in the world around you? And may I encourage us, here's the bottom line, whatever's stirring in you and whatever God is doing in your life, may the attitude of our hearts always be one of humility. It's stated in 1 Peter 5, 6, and 7, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Do you hear the posture of that? I cannot do it, but God can. Would you pray with me?